Welcome to the last week of Intro Psych. We are now in week 15. We will be covering the last chapter, chapter 13, which is psychological therapies. And as you know from last week, we covered all the main psychological disorders. And I had said at that time that you would be paying special attention to each one because they'll be talked about again the following week. So this week, we will revisit each one of those disorders and talking about now how can it be treated. And there's various routes to treatment. So as usual, each week you have the to-do list here. The objectives for getting through chapter 13 are here. You're going to see popping up some past content that we've talked about. Specifically in the personality chapter where we covered some of the main theorists of personality like Freud and Maslow and Rogers. Many of those individuals were not just theorists about personality, but they developed their own techniques in terms of therapies and treatments and how to treat individuals when something goes awry, so to speak, with personality. You have a personality disorder or you have a mental illness. They employed their various perspectives to treating said disorder. So we're going to look at first just historically how the mentally ill have been treated and identify kind of where it stems today with two broad categories of therapy. And then we'll be getting into the details of each. So first we'd be looking at Freud and psychoanalytic theory, and his technique is psychoanalysis. The approach is psychodynamic. All of those are just sort of synonyms for how Freud viewed the individual and psychoses in general, mental illness, and how his approach was unique in that, looks at some of the psychodynamic perspectives today, otherwise known as the Neo-Freudians, which you probably remember from the chapter on personality. So that's the first sort of perspective that we cover. And then we go into humanistic therapies, which are also often called person-centered or Gestalt therapy. Very different in approach to Freud, where the focus is more on the individual and personal growth, goals, achievement. You might remember Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which fits in there and ties in there. And so that's sort of the second one. Then we go into more of the behavioral route, where we're looking at using elements of classical and operant conditioning specifically to treat disordered behavior. Which disorders that works best with. You'll be taking a look at that and how effective it can be. And then lastly, looking at cognitive therapy, where the goal is really targeting the person's thinking and specifically what disorders that is meant to treat. So we get a good overview of the various theories and how they fit into treatment. And then it goes moving into now group therapy, where you might actually see various forms of these types employed in a group therapy setting. But specifically, what does group therapy work best for? Are there particular disorders that it works best for? And what tend to be the advantages and disadvantages of group therapy? It is not an option for everyone. And we've seen that it works best with certain illnesses rather than others. So definitely know that as you're going through the material this week. Some new things regarding cyber therapy, which is more just like online therapy and how can we make that work, and how effective is that. And then lastly, we will get into more of the biological treatments for psychological disorders. So, i.e. drugs and medication and what can be done there. With the more severe techniques, we tend to think of as the last resort when therapy and drugs are not producing the effects that the person needs. Some specific disorders we might consider electroconvulsive therapy, psychosurgery, and other various what they call biomedical techniques. So the last part of the chapter will look at some of those, and even a new direction in terms of virtual reality, which works, very good for example, people suffering from some anxiety-related disorders like PTSD. So some interesting stuff there. So that's pretty much an overview of the chapter. Here are my PowerPoint slides for the chapter. And again, please, have those open and with you as you're reading through the book. The videos this week that you're going to be watching are in the same episode as last week, which is episode 17. You'll just be watching those specific ones to therapy, whereas last week I think you watched a couple in this episode. This week, all of the ones dealing with psychological therapies will be the ones that are for this week. Your discussion is on Hawk reading number 34, which deals with systematic desensitization, which is basically a technique used for a lot of anxiety disorders. Hence is why it's titled Relaxing Your Fears Away. Basically learning how not to be afraid. So it's employing a fair degree of some learning principles that we covered back in chapter 4. How we acquire a phobia and how we treat a phobia is often best approached through those learning principles such as classical conditioning and operant conditioning. And so it's really important that maybe you revisit chapter 4 before you attempt to answer these questions. You want to make sure again that you have a good understanding of how clinicians are using these learning principles to treat their clients with disorders like a phobia. Why does it work well, specifically for anxiety disorders and phobias? What is the key element there? That's kind of what you'll be explaining this week. Okay. Then you have a quiz number 13 on the chapter, and you have your final exam, which is covering 3 chapters, chapters 7, 12, and 13. So you're going to be covering everything from cognition to psychological disorders and psychological therapies. That's your final exam. There's 45 questions and 45 minutes to do it. The final exam is not due until the following week, Tuesday, December 18th. You have until then to complete the final exam. And I would recommend take the time that you need for this test. Don't try to get it done super early just to be done. Don't rush it. You have till Tuesday, so use that time wisely, and make sure that you make that last test count well towards your grade, since it is 45 points. And then I'm also offering the very last extra credit opportunity this semester. So if you haven't been able to take advantage of a previous one, here is one that I'm giving out. It is going to be due Wednesday, the 16th. And I see that I'm sorry, that's an error right there. It's actually going to be due on Monday, which would be the 17th. So I'll go ahead and make that change. What you're going to be doing is basically watching a video. It can be any one of your choosing, but it needs to be one that has to do with a mental illness, okay, like a psychological disorder directly related to a psychological disorder. I give some examples here, and then I also give a link to a website that has many more examples of movies. These are some more recent ones, but this is a more exhaustive list if you want to check it out. You'll just be watching the film, and then you'll be answering these questions in here, so indicate, what's the disorder that's highlighted in the film? How do you know what the disorder is? So what are the symptoms? How did it affect the person's life in the film and those around the person? What types of treatment, if any, were used that you saw in the movie? And how did the person respond? Did it have a resolution? And then say, what would have been the best line of treatment? Because sometimes we watch a movie and we see how the person's treated and it's all wrong. And then we think, wow, they really should have gone this route or that route. And after reading the chapter, you should kind of know what are the best routes of treatment for each type of mental illness. Okay. So you'll be kind of adding your own 2 cents there in terms of what you've learned and how can you apply it to the person in the movie that you choose. So all of that can be done by just clicking on the extra credit assignment tab, and you can submit your assignment directly through this tab when you click on it, and then you'll be all set. But that wraps up the week. Definitely let me know if you have any questions as you're going through your week. Otherwise, I just want to say it's been a great class. I've had some great interactions with some of you. Online classes are interesting. Some people really kind of do their own thing, and I don't hear very much from you. And then others I get a lot of interaction with via email. Some of you even come into my office and see me in person. So it's just been a nice variety this semester, different students, different perspectives. So I really enjoyed that. I've really enjoyed the tweets, mainly because they're very broad at the start of each week before you've read your material, and I kind of get a sense of what you understand and what you know before you've dove into any of the material, and that makes it kind of fun and interesting. Gives me a glimpse into just what you know already about psychology. So great class. I hope everyone has a wonderful holiday break. Whatever you celebrate, I hope that you can do it with friends and family and enjoy a good kind of hiatus from school pressures, hopefully. So have a wonderful break, everyone, and thanks for a great semester.